All right, and I guess I'm the last one to introduce myself. If it's cool with everyone, is it okay if I sit since the microphone is coming out of the laptop? That way, whoever's online can hear better. All right. Well, I am Jacob. I come from a video production background, but I heard people over here mention e-learning, and that's what I do as well. I kind of fell into the adult education and e-learning when I did my graduate degree. So then I started doing more multimedia production, more e-learning development, and then I fell into still did my video production on the side, and so then I started learning After Effects a few years ago. Oh man, this program is gigantic. So what I do currently is I work full time on an education team at Abbott. It's also medical devices, and I develop e-learning, animations for their training, do voiceovers, recording, but then I also do my video production on the side, whether it's training videos, I do Camtasia screencast recordings, once again, voiceovers and stuff like that. I'm working on making my first animated explainer video. That involves me learning more of Illustrator, so I'm working on that right now to bring into After Effects. This is some of my information. Feel free to copy it down, or if the file's provided, then you guys can email me if there's any questions or whatever you have. So this is what we're going into today. We're just going to go over some very basic concepts, going over the interface, how to create a composition, how to create some layers on the composition, some objects on the layers, such as shapes, some text. We're going to go over keyframes, which is the basic building block of all of After Effects. Everything's built on keyframes. And then we're going to learn how to do just a basic visual effect. And of course, export it so you can share it with people. So, does anybody have any questions so far? Or anything? Or any questions for me? Yes. Do you happen to have the file? Or you might be able to get it on the website too if you go to the Adobe Awesome website. Also, I hope you don't mind. I might hack a little bit. I've had allergies bother me these past few weeks, so I'll wait till you get it opened up. That way we got it and stuff. Does anyone else need the file? Yeah. What I So when you first open After Effects, you have the user interface. This is in the new CC 2018 version of After Effects. This is what you see. You have your composition panel in the center, which where you have the option to open a new composition, or you can open new composition from footage. So you can import like a footage file such as MP4 or .mov or anything that was recorded from a camera. On your left, up at the top, you got your tools bar, your project panel on your left. It shows the render queue at the bottom when you first open it up, but later on that becomes the composition timeline when you open up a composition. You have your preview panel on the side where you can set your play settings as you're playing a composition. And then you have your info panel, which shows the info about the composition. I really use the info panel, but it depends on what you need to do. The center here. So you have your these right here. So you have a new composition, which if you click it, you will create a new composition for your timeline, or you have new composition from footage. So when you click that, it'll take you to a browser window, and you can pick footage that where you can create a composition from that footage. Not yet. I'm just going through the opening first so far, and then I'm gonna walk through the steps of how to make what I provided in the exercise file as well. So then, so say getting started in After Effects, you open it up and you have the new composition panel. Is everybody who's following along have After Effects open? Okay. Next, you click on New Composition, and you see this screen here with the composition settings. Up at the top, you have the option to name your composition. You have your presets, which you can choose different formats for your footage. Usually I'm working in HD 1080 at 29.97 or 30 frames a second, but it also depends on what your film format's going to be, whether it's for TV, YouTube, Facebook, or actually what footage you're importing as well.
Look at that one for YouTube.
YouTube, now that YouTube supports 4K, you can adjust this to make a, see underneath there you got the width and the height for aspect ratio.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually put in 3840 by 2160 for the 4K resolution, which if you have that option with the footage, you can do that. Or if you're just shooting with 1080, that's good too.
That's the most common.
Yeah. Yeah, and then that'll adjust that all for you. Yeah, it's a 3840 by 2160. It's the 4K UHD. It's not the full raw 4K, which I actually forget those numbers at this moment because I never work in it, but I can always get that for you later. So. Ultra high definition. Does anybody else have any questions? Or? It's starting to grow. Like it's being used on Netflix, YouTube. Facebook doesn't really do it, and I haven't really seen it on like actual broadcast TV. So. Yeah, the thing I like about it the most is I usually work in 1080, but if I shoot 4K, I can punch in footage and do close-ups without losing resolution or like footage getting pixelated. So that's pretty nice as well. Moving down the composition settings panel, looking at the pixel aspect ratio, I usually leave it at square pixels because that's usually good for web videos since computers are all square pixels. But you have other options as well in case you're exporting for television. You have NTSC for American standards, PAL for like European standards, and then other options if needed, depending on what format you're working in. Moving over to the advanced section, I honestly don't go over here that much because it's, as I said, After Effects really sets up a lot of stuff for you. Yeah. Maybe like delays or something. Okay. So here we have the advanced composition settings, which the anchor point up at the top is usually, at least for me, unless it's been changed for anyone else, has never been highlighted or able to be changed for me. But what you can do with that is when you open a new composition, you can choose where you want your anchor point to be before even opening the project. However, I find it much easier to move the anchor point once the project's already open. So I usually just ignore that. With the preserved frame rate and preserved resolution, you can nest multiple compositions in compositions. So when you're exporting video from After Effects, say you have one composition in a composition that's 1080 and your master composition is 720, those will allow the resolution of that 1080p composition to be maintained instead of it converting everything to 720. That's the same with frame rate, whether it's 30 frames a second, 24 frames a second, or etc.
Is it good practice to mix resolutions like that, or is it better to, have 720, 720?
I think it depends what you're going for. If you want to go for some more like some slow effects or some stutter effects, then you can mix it. But if you're doing, say, a promo video or something for TV, it's best to have everything the same frame rate, same resolution. That way it's all the same. But the more creative stuff you get into, such as films and other projects, you can. I mean, I've mixed stuff that are like 120 frames a second. I'm like, oh, it looks kind of cool. So I don't know. So it's good to experiment.
So is there a canvas size you use for web videos?
I usually use 1920 by 1080, the usual like HD aspect ratio, and Facebook's been supporting more of that format as well. Now with Instagram, it's more of the square videos because when you're scrolling through Instagram, you see the vertical stuff. So for that, it's like 1280 by 1280, I think it is, and you can export multiple videos, which I can show you how to do later on. So, excuse me. Last but not least, this is down here for the motion blur in case you want to mess with that, which I will go into a little bit of motion blur later on when doing some shapes. That's if this allows you to adjust when the motion blur happens in the frame and how much motion blur there is. Once again, I never change it, but feel free to experiment and be creative and you can change whatever you want. There's really no messing anything up, so. Although you will get frustrated when you do mess stuff up, so. Last but not least is the 3D render. This is if you convert to 3D layers, which I'm not going into in this presentation, but I could always answer on the side or outside of here. Or come back. Yeah, there's a whole other thing you could do with 3D layers and stuff. It's something I'm still learning as well. But you can either use 3D layers in After Effects, or After Effects has a built-in plugin created by Maxon called Cinema 4D. The version that comes with After Effects is Cinema 4D Lite, the full version Cinema 4D, but you can open that program through After Effects, and that's one of their 3D render engines, and you can build. This might be more advanced, but the stuff like you might see on like Toy Story or whatever, you can build 3D models and animation and do stuff like that. So I actually just took a class on that a few months ago, and I'm like, blew my mind. I made marbles. That was kind of cool. So. All right. So does anyone have any questions about the composition settings? That's the name of the program. So.
Can you mention when you have a composition or a meta composition, like one to ten,
Uh-huh.
like doing something big into something small, but that's not how to think about it, of course. So, what are the and you said that will help the technology maintain.
Yeah, it'll.
Is that what you want, or what does it do? And what is it that you want?
I think it really depends what. I think it depends what you're going for. For instance, maybe that part. There's no reason that I would like change the resolutions in a different thing. I think I personally, if I was making a video, I would have everything the same resolution. Just that option is available.
Mm-hmm.
However, something that I would use more often is the other one with the resolution. Say my entire composition was 30 frames a second, but I had another composition in there that was the 60 frames a second or 120, and that's usually the frame rate for doing slow motion. So I would have that composition in there, and that would maintain that frame rate for keeping that at slow motion, so that way it wouldn't speed it up, if that makes sense.
Oh. So you would have a slow motion inside of another one that's not slow motion.
Yeah, just regular frame rate. Yeah. Say for instance, you were shooting an action sports video, and you had a guy running or a girl running, and they were running at regular speed, but then they run up to a soccer ball, and you want to get a nice slow motion shot of them kicking the soccer ball. Well, in After Effects land, if that footage or composition of them kicking the soccer ball in slow motion is 120 frames a second, that allows that frame rate to be maintained. So that way, when you're watching the entire video in its whole, that part's still in slow motion and you get that effect instead of that being sped up to the regular 30 frames a second and in regular motion. Okay. Did I explain that well enough? Or?
Is it, I thought that 30 frames per second slower than that.
30, so in video world, there's 30 frames in 1 second. The more frames you fit in a second, I don't know the exact science behind it, but it increases the shutter speed and it slows it down.
Right.
Okay, cool. You're welcome. Anyone else have any other questions? Or all right. So once we open our new composition, we have compositions everywhere. We have composition opened in the composition panel. We have the composition opened over in the project panel, and instead of the render queue being highlighted at the bottom, we have the composition open, or in Premiere World, timeline, which I use either or interchangeably, so people will know what you're talking about if you say timeline.
So the first one is in the composition and composition. Just repeat what you said.
Okay.
The middle one.
I don't have a laser pointer. So the middle one right here is like your preview screen. It's where you'll be watching whatever's on your timeline down here.
Yeah.
And then, do you want to know about the other one as well, or?
So the other one's in the panel, and the other one's in the panel.
Yeah, this is your project panel. Now you can really see it. Yeah, the only one over here is your project panel. So that's where your composition shows up, but that's where everything else will be imported, like your footage, audio files, different shape layers, and then down here is your actual timeline. Sweet. So for those who are following along with the exercise file, let's start by, I already have everything in the project file, but you can feel free to create new stuff if you want. So let's start by going up to Layer, New, and then we're going to start by adding a solid to the timeline. I like to add a solid because it sets the background color. You can leave nothing up there and have a black background, but for a lot of the stuff I do for my work, they want white backgrounds. So when I choose the solid settings, this comes up. It's white background by default. I leave it like that. You can change the aspect ratio here as well. Since the composition is already 1920 by 1080, I leave it at that. You can change your pixel aspect ratio. I left it at square pixels because the composition square pixels. And then last but not least, you can change the color. And for this, and usually every video I do, I just leave it white. But if someone's like, hey, I want a yellow background, then you can do that here. So and then once that's done, you hit OK. Bam, white background. So next, once we have our white background, which as you saw, it showed up on the timeline as our solid layer, we want to add the shape layer. So once again, you go up to New, Shape Layer. Oh, we have the shape layer appear on the timeline now. That's awesome. But once our shape layer is active, we also have at the top here some new options as far as shapes go. Those are you have your fill and your stroke option. A lot of you are familiar with Photoshop, Illustrator, so you have around the same things. You can choose whether you want no fill or no stroke, solid, your linear gradient, or your radial gradient, along with opacity and whether you The preview option is whether you want it to show it up in preview or not, which you always do because you want to see what it looks like, so I always just leave that checked. The only other thing you have with a stroke is you have the stroke thickness option, and so for right now I just left it at 2 pixels, but you can make it as thick as you want. But once those are all set, you just hit OK on both of them. For this one, I decided to make them blue for the fill and yellow for the stroke. So I went from the last slide to this slide pretty quick, but if you noticed, I zoomed in on the composition panel. To do that, these are some of the shortcuts right here. You can either do Control plus on Windows or Command plus on Mac.
Can you do the yellow, the blue fill and yellow stroke show up in the timeline?
Oh, you mean the shape itself?
Yeah.
So we just selected the colors, but we didn't draw the shape yet. So it's kind of weird. After Effects treats shape layers as like the shape layer itself is the whole layer, but you can draw as many shapes as you want on a shape layer, and you can actually animate shapes differently on each shape differently on each shape layer, and then you can have multiple shape layers. So it's just a whole world of shapes you can get with that. So say for instance if you're making an animated explainer video and you have a desk, so you want all the desk parts on one shape layer, you can have your rectangles with the desk, but then you have your person on another shape layer, and they're the ones doing the animation, making the head move and stuff like that. So all right, so now that we picked our fill and our stroke color, let's look at the shape tools. Up in the toolbar, we have our rectangle tool, and then our other shape options, which are probably also familiar, like in Photoshop, the rounded rectangle tool, ellipse, polygon tool, and star tool. For this tutorial, though, I just chose the rectangle tool because it's very basic shape. So once you have that tool selected, you click and hold on the composition panel, and you just draw out as big as a rectangle as you want, and that's what you get. Everybody good so far?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Next, this is an OCD thing for me, but you don't have to do this. This little thing right here is the anchor point for the shape, and I always have to have it in the center. I don't know why. You don't have to have it in the center because it depends on how you want to rotate it or how you want to scale it. But what I do is you just hit Y as the shortcut, and your pointer creates like this almost little crosshair type shape, and you can move that anchor point wherever you want. For me, being OCD, I just moved it to the center. So, all right. Does anyone have any questions about adding a shape to a shape layer?
Does the XY appear for the crosshair?
For the anchor point?
Yeah. Or just kind of eyeball it?
I just eyeball it. I will show you the transform layers little layer, and you can look at that a little more closely. But I noticed there's a lot of things in After Effects that you can either do exactly to the T, or I learned to stray away from that a little bit and just get a little more creative. And I'm like, oh, this looks good. So, and that works too. So don't have to be dead set by the numbers all the time. So now that we have the shape layer created, let's go for a text layer. Right here is the character options panel on the side, which is what we will be using to edit any text once it's on the timeline. You have your font type, whether it's bold or regular, different spacing options, color. So to add a text layer, and I think this is missing some slides that I had before, but that's okay. I will walk you through it. So what you do is you go up to the top where it says T, and that is your text tool. And what you'll do is you go to the comp panel, you just click, you can either click or drag, and it'll create the little empty text box like you'd see in Microsoft Word, and you just type. So I typed hello, and that's the text I'm using. But once you type that text layer, it also appears right down here as well. So that's one cool thing about After Effects is as you build layers, it just builds them on top of each other. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the text a different color because you can't really see it against that blue background. So what I did here was I zoomed in using Command plus or Control plus so I can see this stroke right here that I made yellow earlier at the beginning. Once I have this zoomed in, then I can see the stroke. I click the fill option over here, bam, and then that opens up. So right now it's that current blue color, but what I want is the yellow color. So I just select the eyedropper tool, just like Photoshop, you can select colors with the eyedropper tool. And I select the stroke and make the text that color. By the way, that was really hard to select because of how tiny the stroke was. So once I have that, hit OK. And then I got yellow text that stands out against this blue square rectangle. Come on, square rectangle. There's so many options you can get into that you can change, but for right now, this is what I have. Does anyone have any questions about text for right now? Okay. Yeah, so you can, if I go back one, did it? There you go. Okay. So yeah, you can, you mean like change your font? Oh yeah, you can do the same thing. If you just install a font on your system, it'll show up in there. So. And then,
Some fonts, like when you go to print them, they have issues if they don't set up properly with script and stuff like that.
yeah,
This isn't going to be an issue here since it's probably the rendering that it's like pixels like that.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And if the only issue I saw was there are some fonts on Mac, and then there are some fonts on Windows, and there's some not like fonts not compatible on either system. So if you want a certain font that you know is on Mac and it's not on Windows or vice versa, I would export your video on that system because this has happened to me recently. I opened a project on I use Windows at work and I opened a project on that machine and it said, "Oh, this font's missing. Fill it in with this." I was like, "All right, whatever. Just do that." But which didn't matter. It was one of my own projects. If it was for work, they'd have been like, "No, it has to be that font." But then again, you just download and install the font, and so you shouldn't have any issues with that.
And I know in design, I can package just something that's like your raw design file, and that goes in, grabs all your assets and your font stuff. Do you have something like that works with After Effects, or is it one of those things you just keep the project where it currently is?
Yeah, you just keep it where it is for now and stuff like that. It's kind of like with Premiere. If it will freak out if it can't find its assets. But one thing that I do like about After Effects over Premiere is the replace files and footage options work so much better in here. So for instance, if let's pretend the shape layer is a footage file and I can't find the footage file, I can either do the locate like you can in Premiere, or if you have like say you're like, man, I want it to be this different. footage file instead. You do an alt click, where if you have something selected down here and something selected up here, you hold alt and you click and drag it down, and it'll replace it instantly. So that's a nice thing too. Oh, excuse me. Does anyone else have any other questions? Or hey Donna, I think I'm gonna go to like slide 30, then take a break. Or okay, cool. All right. Next, we have animating layers. So what I did here was I went down to the timeline instead of working up in the comp panel, and I expanded the transform parameters just by clicking on the little arrows right there. You were asking about the more specific numbers of the anchor point. See, I'm gonna go back one, but if you want to look at those specific numbers, it'd be down here to where you can actually pinpoint the exact number that you want. Uh-huh. So to zoom in on the timeline, it's just like the composition panel, except you don't hit Control or Command, you just hit plus, and this will expand just like in Premiere Pro. So
zoom in on the blue background, or
it'll zoom in on this down here. So instead of like before, it was, see how it was smaller? When you hit plus, it'll expand this way. See how it got like bigger. And I can show you afterwards as well. I can just open up After Effects and show you how it does it. So for right now, I want this shape to move. But to do that, we need to start planning keyframes, which, as I mentioned earlier, keyframes is like the building block of After Effects. It's how all the motion is built in this program. So first, if you look down on the timeline on the left, we're going to look at the position parameter. We're going to click it. Anything with a clock next to it can have keyframes, and you can change those parameters. So not only is this on layers under transform parameters, but they're also under a lot of effect as well, which we'll get into a little bit later. Now I want this rectangle to fly in from the left, but I want it to appear off the screen at the beginning and come in at the 1 second mark. By hitting that clock position, I set a keyframe right here at the 1 second. Then I go to the beginning of the timeline, and then I take the rectangle and I move it off the screen. So I put this here because you can either add or remove a keyframe at the current time, but you don't have to do that. You can also just move the rectangle and it will create a keyframe for you, like that.
so that black and blue is a keyframe.
Yeah, if it's highlighted blue at the bottom, that's the keyframe that was just created, or it's highlighted. There's the other keyframe here that was created was created earlier.
What were the 2 ways to add or remove?
You can either just move an object and it'll create a keyframe automatically, or if you want to remove it, you just highlight the keyframe. You can either delete it, or if you move the playhead to where the keyframe is, the little add or remove keyframe option is highlighted here. You can click that and it'll get rid of it as well. Okay. See, so you can either add your keyframe by clicking this over here, or you just move the shape and it'll automatically create a keyframe. Do you want me to come show you, or? to take a little break there. Is everyone good with that, or?
Mhm.
So I was talking to Donna, and she suggested that I bring up the software itself and I work along with y'all that are working. Which is that cool with y'all? Just switch back and forth, or? Okay.
Well, if it's big enough, you could just stay in the software.
Okay. I might keep the let's see. Yeah, I could totally stay in the software. I might keep the presentation up just as a guide for me. So let's see what slide is on. All right. So now that we have our motion on our rectangle, this layer has the text layer already done, so don't mind that. But now that we have our motion on our rectangle, remember I mentioned motion blur earlier? We have a little dot right here, like 3 dots, that stands for motion blur.
Mm-hmm.
With it off, it's that, but you turn it on, and that gives like, it's very, it's not that noticeable, but you can see just a little blur at the end as it's coming in, and it gives just a really cool effect. It's not necessary at all, but I think. What's that? Motion blur. Yeah, exactly. I think it's fun. Oh yeah, yeah. It's the screen's kind of small, so yeah, it's right on this shape layer, right there. You got it? Okay. So this I turned it on the rectangle on the shape layer. So when I bring it in, here I'll do it first with it off. It's probably a little, actually it's probably a little blurry anyways because of just After Effects takes a lot of power to preview. But I turn the motion blur on. So I don't know if you saw that or.
Is that the text or the box?
It's the box right now. This is the animated layer that I was gonna go through the steps and to show you that. Yes. Actually, yeah, it just blurs the shape as it's coming in. Like it distorts it a bit as it's coming in. And it's more noticeable when you have the finished video, which I'll show you at the end.
Mhm.
Yeah, this program is way more creative than Flash. I haven't used Flash that much actually. I started to use it and I'm like,
Flash has a motion.
it does? Okay.
For animation.
So once the rectangle comes in, I want to do the same thing for the text. So the rectangle comes in at about the 1 second mark. So I want the text to take about another second to come in. So what I did here was I added another keyframe by hitting the position parameter on the text layer. I backed up about a second once the rectangle comes in, and then that's when I slid the text off the screen. So actually I can do that for you. So I go back to about the second mark, right as the text comes in. I click and hold on text, and I slide it off the screen. And see how it's like kind of wiggly there? If you hit the shift key, it straightens it up. So, kind of like the same thing in Photoshop. You hit the shift key and does that thing. And then I also turned on motion blur on the text layer as well. So when they come in, Yeah, that's the next part I'm gonna show. So let's see, where am I at? So now I want to add, as it comes in, I don't want it to just come in and just stay there. I want to add a little pop to it, as you saw. So what I did, oh, where's mine? Was I went forward about 6 frames, and I used frames in this part because the short amount of time makes it so it happens really fast. So you can either move the playhead forward 6 frames by like 6 little clicks like this, or on a Windows computer, it's page up and page down. On a Mac, if you holding Command, hit the right key, and you can go frame by frame. What I'll do here is I'll set the scaling parameter right there by hitting the clock option as well. I'll go back to the original point where it just comes in, and I'll hit the keyframe again, because when you do like any motion parameters, if you want everything before and after to stay at the same area, you have to kind of like set the stop and start, or else After Effects will it'll start just making keyframes. Like I've gone through things where I'm like, where did this keyframe come from?
Also, instead of when you just setting the keyframe, you're also moving the playhead after you make the keyframe, because there's something called a feature with the tool where it puts more keyframes for you than you want.
Yeah, I've had stuff happen before, and I don't know if it's a bug in After Effects where if I don't set the keyframe, the playhead exactly where I want the keyframe, I would sometimes see motion, and I'm like, I did not create this motion, and I would zoom out, and I would see a keyframe like way down the timeline. I didn't put it there, so it's
So there's 2 steps then. One is for the keyframe and one is for where you put the playhead.
yeah. So say you set the playhead first though, and then you set the keyframe, because the keyframe will appear where the playhead is. Yeah. I added these ones down here, like the start and stop keyframes, and to do that, all I did was hit this over here. Yeah. Yeah, you can insert as many keyframes as you want. That's actually what I did here. So to get that little pop, I went forward 3 keyframes, and see how it zooms in a bit? I'll delete that keyframe right now and re-show you how I did that. So I have the 2 keyframes set from the scaling parameter, but I want to get that little pop. So I go forward the 3 frames in the center of these 2, and then all I did to do that was, let's see if I can. So this is the scaling parameter right here. I click and hold, and I drag it to the right a little bit, scaling it in a bit. But then that automatically creates the keyframe on the timeline. So, yeah. Something I found out the hard way sometimes, because I'm like, why is this making keyframes?
Where's the, I mean, when you did that, it created a keyframe?
Yes.
When you scaled it?
Yes.
So the keyframe being that
Uh-huh. Yes. And the only reason it's blue is because it's still highlighted. I can click off it, and that'll unhighlight it. So.
Oh.
But with that keyframe scaled in a bit, you hit the play button, and it does that little pop-in motion.
You can do the same thing like this in Photoshop.
Okay. It's the same thing. Yeah, I haven't touched Photoshop animation, but I know you can make GIFs and stuff, right?
Yeah, but you have the same timeline like this.
Okay.
You have that in Photoshop. Not in detail. With properties that you can make after the position.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
we're setting the playhead first to tell where to put that change,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then we'll create the keyframe there that has the change.
Yes. Okay.
The diamonds.
Uh-huh.
Some of them are half gray and some are white.
So the ones with the gray at the beginning, that's the first keyframe, like the very first keyframe on that layer. And the one where it's pointing to the right is the very last keyframe on the layer.
Okay.
Because you notice on this one, there's three keyframes.
Yeah.
So the first one, the middle one, and the last one. So it's I think it got added eventually because I never noticed it before, or I just didn't notice it. But I was just like, oh, they're telling you which is the beginning, middle, or
It's good to know.
yeah. So you're like, all right, it'll help you know if you're at the beginning of your layer or stuff like that. So it also helps so you don't accidentally delete keyframes, which I've done too. All right. So does anyone have questions on basic motion? It's just keyframes. You can adjust keyframes in any of those parameters: scale, position, rotate. You can make it do a bunch of stuff.
Just on the timing, do you decide like what looks good based on experience or just like what's the right order and kind of uh, not put it all at the same time?
Yeah, just on stuff I've made, I found that yeah, just based on experience, you can make these slower if you want. Like I can like drag these out if I want. Yeah, and I've noticed a lot of transitions of stuff coming in 1 seconds. It's not a standard, but I notice it's the best. It's the speed that allows the eye to follow it the best. But I don't know, I can have the text come in super fast if I move its beginning keyframe. And it could be like, it can come in a lot faster. So it just depends on how close or how far the keyframes are apart on the timeline. Okay. Last but not least, I'm gonna add a little effects or the effect to this. You guys care if I just add it on this one instead of opening the actual effect timeline that I made, or all right. So let's see if I can. So up at the top here, you have a little double arrows which shows other panels that you have available. If you click on the effects and presets, it brings up all the effects that you have in After Effects. Yeah, I honestly think a lot of people just tried it on YouTube, so you could probably find. I still find stuff on YouTube. I'm like, I didn't know that did that. So, um, yeah, YouTube, Linda, or just play with it and find out what stuff does and everything. So, I still haven't used all the effects. So, one that I'm going to use tonight though is a lens flare. Just give the little hello a flash. So, if you type in lens flare will be one of those options right there. What we'll do is we'll click and drag and drop it onto the text layer. And you see the flares already activated?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you see like it highlighted right here? And this is the center point of the flare once I dropped it. If I move it around, see how like, so what I want it to do now once the text pops is I want it to pop and then I want like a flare to like just come across, give it a little flash. So I'm going to position my playhead after the last keyframe of the scale. I'm just going to keep sliding back and forth here. So I want it to start on this side. So I'm going to move the lens flare to the left side of hello. And as I'm,
When you drop the lens there on the text layer, did it bring a new layer from that side so you can animate it?
No, it dropped the effect on the text layer itself. Yeah, if you go down to the timeline, you can see the effect is on the hello itself.
Okay.
So you can look and adjust effects down here in the timeline, or it'll bring them up in the effects control panel up here, kind of like the same way it does in Premiere Pro.
Yeah, I didn't know if it did move.
Yeah, it'll group it all together, and you can stack effects and switch them in different orders and stuff, and how you want it to appear.
When you go down to the
Down here,
yeah,
the timeline.
the timeline, did you see the word hello or just because I thought that the text was on the text layer.
Yeah, it's on. Yeah, if I open the effects right here, it's on the effect, but it's under the hello text right here.
Oh,
Yeah. But you can also see it up here in the composition panel as well.
can you put the drop down menu to the text?
Uh-huh.
Did you see hello? Not that.
Which one are you looking for?
Oh, yeah, that one.
Uh-huh.
And you put text. Yeah, I was thinking that you would see the word hello there, but you already have it.
Yeah, hello's the main layer. I don't go into these ones, and I haven't, to be honest, I haven't experimented with these much. But with the transform parameters, you transform the whole layer, but it's kind of like the shape layer. You can have multiple text on a text layer, and you can do more with the path
But if
option
you had created a second effect, would it go under that same effect?
right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I'll do that for you real quick. So let's say I have lens, and then another favorite one I like to use is corner pin. Corner pin, like you can just store it the left, right, top, and bottom corners of an object. So if I drag and drop corner pin on the text layer as well, and then I go over here and scroll down, you see corner pin is also under the effects.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll group all the effects underneath on the timeline, but then it'll also group them up here, and you can drag and drop them and switch like orders and stuff and everything. So.
And so that's just the one text layer. But if you had a second
Yeah,
layer,
yeah, all the effects are grouped under one layer. So these effects are on this layer. If I had another layer, it'd be different effects or same effects, depends on what effect you have on that layer.
you can have multiple effects layers.
Uh-huh. I don't know if that made sense. It made sense? All right. So for right now, we're going to ignore this one, and we're going to get back to the flare. I lost it. There it is. Okay. So I want the flare to start here after I already have my playhead after the scale option. So I want to set a keyframe by clicking the little clock by the flare center. And then I want my flare to, I don't know, maybe not even be a second. Like, oops. I'm going to have it end at 3. So I'm going to have this flare center move across. So it shifts so it stays in line to right there. As you notice, it creates keyframes on the effects layer underneath the text layer. So let's play that, see how that looks. All right, well that's kind of cool, but as you guys noticed, as hello comes in right here, it, yeah, passes the flare center before I want it to actually appear. And I don't want that. I don't want I want the flare to appear after hellos come in.
Mm-hmm.
So another option over here is the flare brightness. So I definitely want the flare brightness to start before my flare starts. So I'm going to set a keyframe while the flare brightness is at 100%. I'm going to set a keyframe right here. And I don't want it to cross it while it's at 100%. So I'm going to set it right here. And I'm going to set this to 0%. So you can click here, you can drag it down, or you can just click this, hit 0, enter, and that gets rid of the flare center until hello is past the flare center. So then when I hit play, then the flare does its animation after it passes it, because the flare brightness is at 0.
You might have mentioned this already. By taking the clock and you create a keyframe.
Yeah, anything with a clock means you can create a keyframe. You can control its parameters. All right. Does anyone have, that is a very basic visual effect, but does anyone have any questions about that, or that's fine? Huh?
So I want to go point to the mix a little easier.
Yeah, go for it.
Say if you set your first motion keyframe like down here, and then your second one like here, and then the third one down here. Would it go as a straight line up and down, or would it curve?
It'll go as a straight line, but you can curve it. So
Okay, that would go with the path then, I guess. I saw something there.
yeah. So let me see if I can show you what this. There it is. Where are you at? So this is the motion path for hello right now. I don't know if you can see it really well, but there's a little circle right here. It's it's kind of like in Photoshop, like the Bezier path. Yeah, so you can click that and like curve it, and you can control the curve and stuff. So, okay. So what I did was I clicked on the object itself, and you see the motion path. When you click on the motion path itself, it brings up the little control, the little circles. Yeah. And then you can only control it from the beginning right here. We control the end of the beginning. I can like do this, and so when I do that, make it curved a bit, then I can like, if I unselect it, I'll take that off and go. Whoop. There's a little curve coming in instead, so.
Isn't the light flare curve up like that instead of like that?
No, I just made the curve text, and the flare still comes in straight, so.
Was that your question?
Yeah, but it was the same process from making the flare to curve like that.
Yeah. See, I've never actually done that, so. So I don't really think you can, just because it's you're controlling the flare center, not the actual position of it. But if you want to cheat that a bit, you could probably like bring a little bit, set another keyframe, push it up here, set another keyframe, and just set multiple keyframes. So. Okay. So now that we have that done, it's time to export the video. Okay. So what I do is there's the tilde or enye key. If you hit that, it'll make any window that's highlighted full screen. So with the timeline highlighted, I hit it, and it makes bigger timeline. And I use this when I'm working with a lot of layers. So right here is the, what's that? What's that?
Is that a toggle function?
Yeah, it's a toggle function. You set the it's up above the tab key, so tilde or enye, and you can full screen anything that's highlighted. So say I want this right here, I can hit the tilde, and that does it. Or this right here. And I do this often just so I can. Usually I do this when I have a lot of layers, and then I have the composition panel or preview screen on a separate screen. So um, when I'm working with two. But what I want to do is I only want to export the work area for when we export. Stop doing that. So I zoom out all the way, see the end of my work area out here, and I hover over this, and I move it all the way up. Otherwise, we'd have like 2 minutes of just stuff sitting there. So to zoom in a little more, I just hit the plus. And I'm going to move it to where this last keyframe is. A little after it. Once I have that set, tilde key again just so I can see everything. Then I'm going to go to File, Export. There's two things you can do to export. Because of my also OCD thing, I always go to Add to Media Encoder. And the reason I do that is I believe you have more formatting options in Media Encoder. And so that's why I always send my projects to there. But I can always go through render queue if you need as well. I don't think so. I think it all depends on the file or the footage and all the layers you have and stuff.
Composition too?
What's that?
You said
Oh.
you add the composition too, but you can always
Adobe Media Encoder. And it's not composition queue, it's render queue. So there's, if you've used this with Premiere, it's a lot of the same stuff. You can choose your format, your presets. Especially for YouTube, I just leave it H.264. You click on this to select your output location. I'm just going to choose the same folder that we're working in, but I have a weird file structure. So I'll just leave it there, and you hit play. It does its thing, and since it was so short, it's not going to take long to export. So. Yeah, AEP is the After Effects project file, but you're exporting it here as an MP4 file. And then once it's done, I can click on this. It'll bring me to where it exported. I double click, open it, even though it opens it on my other screen. Hit play. And there it is. And that is it. Does anyone have any other questions as far as how I did something or anything? Yeah. Okay. So on your timeline, you got this little bar right here. Oh, you got it? Okay, show y'all. So you got the work area right here, and you got the start, or you can drag it to where you want it to start, or you can drag it to where you want it to finish. So, and whatever you export here, or whatever you send, what I'm going to do is next step here. So to export, once I set my work area, I went up to File, and I'm pretty sure this is the same for Windows as well. You go to Export, you have two options. Well, you have four, but the ones that, if you're just exporting directly from After Effects, is either Add to Media Encoder or Add to Render Queue. Add to Render Queue does it directly in After Effects, but I always go to, not that. I always go to Media Encoder because you have more formatting options, and I think you have better control over what you export. But it's your preference, whichever one you want to do. So I click that, and it has my old file upstairs, so I'll like just remove that. So I got the file that I just exported over to here. You can choose different formats. I usually choose H.264. That's MP4 file, and you can upload that to YouTube or use it on any web video or anything that accepts. What's that? So I've never used it, but I think it'll export the entire video frame by frame as JPEG. So
You don't want to do that. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
You don't want to do that with a big video.
You're exporting, but it says
in ingest, I think that has to do with proxies and not working with proxies is like say you're working with 4K footage and you had to use 1080 footage as a substitute. That's like a whole other ballpark. Something that I'm actually learning myself. So
also it's another option that in that menu, it's another option, not the title of the file.
yeah, yeah. And then I always just choose high bit rate. It gives it the highest quality, but you can always change as much as you want. You got all the different options. Next, you can click your output location. It added an _1, so I don't have to worry about renaming it. But I'll save in the same location. Once you're ready, you hit the. Okay.
One of their, maybe the ones that the different sizes. Yeah, there you go. Like for the 1020, 1080, 720. As far as what are the, how do those differ? And is it strictly the size, the width and height dimensions? I'm thinking like Photoshop frames. I'll do
Yeah,
1080
it's
by
yeah, it's the resolution of the file that will be.
the size.
Yeah.
So when if you shot a video, say with your smartphone, and then whatever it is,
Hmm.
then what's the recommended?
You mean to upload to Facebook or
Well,
to
if
edit?
you're going to use it in After Effects, what would how would you be
That would really depend on what your phone shoots it at. My phone can shoot 4K, but
Yeah.
I have to bump it down to 720 if I want to see space.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. But I guess
So the way the 720, that's the width, the horizontal dimension?
1080 is the vertical. 1920 is the 1080 is this way. 1920.
Now we're just looking at that. So there's the 1080p, for example, 720p.
Yeah.
So that's the height of
1,880 pixels high or 625.
Yeah. Yeah, and you got all the options that you need. Yeah, this is some. I don't know if this is new in 2018 CC, but I started seeing this up after a while, after like some of the updates. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So, yeah, because you can now stream 4K on YouTube.
This is the auto info dot
You know, I have no idea. I really don't. Um, so, but I can find out and get back to you if you want. So, I just always leave it checked. And then once everything is set here, you just hit the start queue, and it exports it. This is a very short file, so it doesn't take long. Once it's done, you just hit it, and then there it is. And you can either open it up to play it or play right there. And that is very basic overview animation in After Effects. Does anyone have any additional questions or any other thing on your mind? Yeah, so I'm gonna bring up the PowerPoint again. If I can work my mouse. As I said, I think I mentioned earlier, I'm getting better in After Effects myself. Um, and I think I mentioned to Donna that as I give training, I I think it helps teach me better as well. But I worked for a company called Luminex, another biotech company, and I've done a lot of just this is one of their tutorials I made for their website, and this is on their YouTube. This is not nothing NDA or anything. So, but this is just very basic motion graphics I did in After Effects. Yeah. So that's that video I did there. Here's another one that I did for fun. So I I created wall. This is I did this was part of like an e-learning module I created for Luminix, but I wanted transitions between scenes in I used a software called Storyline, and so I made different slides with these video transitions. So I made like these fake looking lights and panels in Photoshop. I made 3D layers in After Effects and I stretched them across 3D planes. And then once it was done and I animated a camera through the space, then I made like a little 3D hallway. So, and this took me a while because it was my very first time working with 3D, and it was very frustrating, a lot of swearing, um, and but it ended up being cool. And this room ended up not being blank. There were like pictures of like lab coats and sinks and stuff, but I removed everything because that was an internal training, so it was NDA, and I removed everything and just had this for my portfolio. So it's an e-learning authoring tool. You create like e-learning modules, online training. Like you can create compliance training, employee orientation. The sky's the limits with that stuff. And then that's the end. So oh, these lines. I so there's a one of the other effects in After Effects is a repeat effect. I think it's called. So what I did was I set like one of these tiles on a 3D plane. I put the repeat effect, and you increase the number of repeats, and it just stretched it like automatically. So, which was pretty cool. I didn't have to like copy and paste and move every single one. So, yeah, yeah. And I didn't know about it at first. It was my coworker who showed me. I was like, dude, you just saved me so much time. So, yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. What do you mean, like a PowerPoint presentation or? Oh, okay. Did you want it like to where like you took some slides from someone else, and just put them all in one PowerPoint? Or, I don't know if I'm understanding your question. Oh, okay. In After Effects though, or? Oh, okay. My bad. Um, so yeah, what you could do is I go back to After Effects. Oh, so what she wants to know is yeah, so say you have like multiple projects, but you want to, and correct me if I didn't understand the question. Say you have like a certain animation, but you want to repeat the animation, but with different objects, or you want to like create different animations in one project, like different pieces.
So the you like the hello one would be done, and maybe next one it might say like people from this part, but the next one they say like people from that part.
Exactly. So like, can I have the discrete pieces like the hello project goes by itself, and then one that's, also for Earth, and another one that's
Oh yeah, you can.
and goes together like one I would use welcome to Mars, much like welcome to Earth,
Yeah, let me see if I can do that for you real quick. So, all right, so here's like my AE presentation project. Um, but let me create a new project real quick, and I'm gonna call this one just. Oh, yeah, oh, it's on the other screen. Okay. Call this just sample project, and so this is sample project, and I'm just gonna save it. I'm not gonna add anything, but I'm gonna add it in the same folder. So I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna open my other project.
So when you hit the composition sample and you save it as sample project,
Uh-huh.
you're naming two things, two different things. Like one is the project and one is the folder that you're using.
No, it's just both the project name. So
Oh, okay. So you didn't change sample project. It was already, it filled it in for you.
yeah.
Okay.
So if I'm understanding correctly, I just created. Say someone else creates another project, and I want to import whatever project they made. I can go the other After Effects project I made. I can go to import, go to um, import file. If I navigate, oh, that was another thing I worked on. Bam. Alright. So video. So say someone else worked on this other project. I can select it and I can choose whether I want to create a composition or not. But if I'm importing another After Effects project, I'm probably going to want to create a composition. So I can do that, open, and it brings in that other project that someone else worked on. And it can have all the animations and layers, hello to, or whatever you want, and then here's the composition right there, and I'd be able, yeah, yep, I can either open it by itself by double clicking, or if I go back to the what I was working on, you're right, I can drag it down here and I can place it on top, and it shows up as brown because it's a composition, but you can nest, like, say all this hello stuff. I'm sure you can pretty much nest anything you want in another composition. So I'll copy this, open this composition, paste them all. This is gonna look weird, but mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I copied and pasted. Yeah, just these layers right here. Oh, all the hello stuff. So I'm gonna move it down a bit so that way you can see the first hello pop up. See the first one come in. There it is. And then, oh, this is why it's not showing up. Yeah, the what I pasted it backwards so the white background's on top. I've done this all the time, so you could just drag it around like that. And then go back over. That, and it is right there. So. Yeah, you can create as many right here. You can create as many folders as you want, like audio. Oh, you mean down on the timeline or up here? Oh, like oh yes, you can do that. So I'm gonna do a really. It's all right. Sometimes I don't understand the question. So so you have this whole thing right here. But say I'm gonna do a really easy effect. So I do this a lot too. I have the fade. When I do fade in and out over frames, because you can choose how many frames you want the fade to last. The default's 15 seconds. So say I say I apply it to not 15 seconds, 15 frames. My bad. Oh, that's better. Sorry, long day. Yeah. So I'm actually gonna remove these parameters just so I can show you the fade effect. So right here.
Oh, so highlighting all the layers
Yeah, you can just I'm just deleting keyframes to show how this works. So you got hello right there, but if see how it fades in on the hello. But if I might have to delete. Oops, this mouse is very sensitive. Let's say I put it on this whole thing right here, and see how the whole thing fades. So yeah, so you can group everything in a composition like that. So you have like 70 layers, and you want one effect to affect all 70 layers. You can put them all in one composition, which I can show you how to do that real quick, and then apply that effect to just all of that. Yeah. So to say we have these three layers right here, and we want them all in one layer, or one composition, you'll select them. You go up to File, and you go down here to, where's that? Edit. Oh, composition, pre-comp. Sorry, I'm not used to working like this. There it is, pre-compose. Oh, it's under layer. My bad. There it is. Pre-compose. Oh, sorry. It keeps jumping to this screen. I was like, where's it at? Okay. So you can have a new composition name. So name whatever you want. New group layers. And this is usually never highlighted. So usually move all these new attributes into composition. And you can either open the new composition to where it's open like this, or you can leave it closed. So I'm just gonna leave it closed. Hit OK, and there's all the group layers right there. Yeah. Layer. Yeah. Pre-compose. After you, I'll just do it. I'll undo. So you have an option here to open new composition. If you don't check this, it'll just leave the composition closed like this, meaning everything's inside of this composition, which you could always double click and open it. Or I go back to this, just gonna use the shortcut. If I choose open new composition, instead of just leaving the composition on the current timeline, it'll actually open it right here, and you can work on those layers inside of that new composition. Yeah, so it saves a step, but it all depends on your workflow, on your preference and stuff. So.
Oh, it just opens the folder
Yeah.
It's almost like creating symbols in Flash, with objects inside. That's the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably the best description. Compositions are just like folders that house all your objects. So, all right. Does anyone else have any other questions or? All good?